We are in 5 locations today. Get that, 5 locations all at once. I am in Franklin, Tennessee. Akeem is in Burbank, California, in the production area. Amy is in Virginia. Todd is in Oklahoma. And Sam is in Bradenton, Florida. So we are all over the place. And we have a great interview coming up with Todd Nettleton, the Chief of Media Relations for the Voice of the Martyrs USA. Sam's going to introduce him formally in just a moment. But I've got a couple of things I want to share with you. Now, Sam, can I sing a song to kind of introduce CAU?
No.
Okay. I will just announce.
You may not.
We are incredibly enthused to introduce Church Answers University. It is a new way to train people for ministry, and it's ministry education with a certification as opposed to a degree. It is something that is really on the cutting edge of all kinds of training for ministers. We think is going to have a great impact. We already have several from Africa who are already signing up. We're beginning to see some from the United States sign up as well. We are looking forward to this. It is incredibly affordable too. The entire curriculum of 10 courses, all the books supplied by Tyndale is $1,900. So sign up now. And if you sign up right now, you're going to get $100 off your enrollment fee. So just to let you know about that. And also, and forgive all the introductory information before we get to Todd, I just want to say a few words about the New Believers Bible at Tyndale. We've been talking about this, folks, and it's an incredible Bible. Yeah, you can get it for new believers, but you can also get it for yourself and those longer-term believers. It's the New Living Translation, of course, our favorite translation. It combines notes and resources, and it helps a Christian to know, where do I go from here? You're going to love it. Go to the show notes. You can see a lot of information there as you begin to open up this opportunity for not only new believers, but for you as well. Sam, thank you for being patient, Todd and Sam, and Amy and Akeem. And let's go to Sam and your introduction of Todd Nettleton.
Yeah, we're thrilled to introduce Todd Nettleton to all of you. He's the Chief of Media Relations and Message Integration for the Voice of the Martyrs USA and host of the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. He serves as a voice for persecuted Christians, inspiring Christians with the faithfulness of Christ's followers in 70-plus nations where they face persecution for wearing his name. During more than 20 years of serving at Voice of the Martyrs, Todd has traveled the world and conducted face-to-face interviews with hundreds of Christians who've endured persecution in more than 30 nations. He's the host of Voice of the Martyrs Radio and the author of When Faith is Forbidden, 40 Days on the Front Lines with Persecuted Christians, published by Moody in 2021, so relatively new book. You should go pick it up. And a graduate of Bartlesville Wesleyan College, now Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Todd has done postgraduate study at the University of Oklahoma. So Todd, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you and thankful for all that you do in ministry.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, tell us a little bit about Voice of the Martyrs. I've heard of it. I'm familiar with your work, but not everyone is. So what does the organization do, and how did the ministry get started?
Well, the ministry Voice of the Martyrs was founded in 1967, and one of the distinctives about our ministry is we serve persecuted Christians, but our founders were persecuted Christians. Pastor Richard Wurmbrand spent 14 years in prison in communist Romania because of his underground church work. His wife Sabina spent 3 years in prison herself. Many of those times were in a labor camp helping to build the Danube Canal. When they came out of Romania, they were actually ransomed out by Christians in the West. The going rate at the time for political prisoners was about $1,500. The price for Richard Wurmbrand was $10,000. So wow. They considered him a high-value prisoner. He was ransomed to the West. Before he left, the secret police took him aside and said, Pastor Wurmbrand, you're going to the West. You can preach all you want. You can talk about God all you want. You can talk about the Bible all you want, but don't talk about what we've done to you. Don't talk about the prison. Don't talk about the torture. Don't talk about solitary confinement. Pastor Wurmbrand came to the West and did exactly what they told him not to do. He began to share about the prison and solitary confinement. and more importantly, about the pastors who were still in those communist prisons. And everywhere he told those stories, Christians like you and me, we hear that and we say, okay, there's pastors in prison. How do we help them? That's how the Voice of the Martyrs was founded, was really to be an aid, to be a bridge for the church in the free world to help and encourage our persecuted brothers and sisters, as well as a way to get their stories out of hostile and restricted nations and tell them to the wider body of Christ to encourage our own faithfulness, our own passion to serve the Lord. And we've been doing that for more than 50 years now, and we'll continue to do it until Jesus returns.
Todd, this is an obvious question it sounds like an obvious answer, but I want to hear it in full. Why should Christians be praying for brothers and sisters who are enduring persecution for their faith? That's what we need to know as much as anything.
I think the first reason is just because the Bible tells us to. Hebrews 13:3 says, remember those in prison as if you were in prison with them. Well, right. What would you want to know if you were in prison? You'd want to know people were praying for you. And so remember those in prison as if you were with them. The Bible tells us to pray for our persecuted brothers and sisters. But I think even beyond that, once we understand the family relationship, you don't have to remind us to pray. I have two brothers here on earth. If one of them was in prison and getting beaten on every day, you wouldn't have to remind me to care. You wouldn't have to try to convince me, no, really, this is worth your attention. This is worth you praying for. This is worth you speaking out about. That's my brother. Of course, I'm going to speak out about it. And I think when we understand the spiritual relationship within the body of Christ, nobody has to tell us to remember those in prison. Nobody has to tell us our brothers and sisters are being beaten and arrested and even killed. They're our family members. Of course we're going to care. Of course we're going to pray. Of course we're going to speak out on their behalf. That is our spiritual family. The third reason I would share is just because it makes such a difference. I think of a conversation I had on Voice of the Martyrs radio with Gracia Burnham, and she was the one who was held hostage in the Philippines along with her husband, Martin. Eventually, she was rescued. He was killed in the rescue attempt. But she talked about the long months that they were held captive by an Islamist group there. And she said periodically, one of them, she would look at Martin or Martin would look at her, and one of them would say, somebody's praying for us right now. And just somehow supernaturally, God let them know right at this moment, somebody's praying for us. And she talked about what an encouragement and what a blessing that was. I think that's why when we ask persecuted Christians, hey, what can we do for you? How can we help you? The first thing they ask us to do every single time we ask that question, the first thing they say is pray for us. They understand the power of prayer. They understand what a difference it makes. And I think once we kind of grab a hold of that, again, we don't have to be reminded to pray. It becomes a very natural part of our spiritual walk.
Now, as a pastor, we call ourselves at West Bradenton a neighborhood church for the nations. And so, it's the Great Commandment. It's the Great Commission. Right. And every church should be that. It's just kind of our way of putting our own little identity to what we're doing. But the whole idea of being for the nations involves those who are persecuted and, particularly those who are in other places being persecuted. And as a pastor, this is something that I know happens. It's something that I've been taught has happened. And, I even have a degree in missiology. So you hear about this stuff, but I believe there's a disconnect with particularly the American church and those who are being persecuted. And it's like we hear that it's happening, but we're not as connected as we need to be to the fact that it is. And prayer involves that connection. So what's a way that a church can learn more, actually start praying? Help our listeners out. So let's assume there's some people listening and they're going, well, okay, I kind of know this, but I need to learn more about it. What would you suggest, Todd, that somebody do?
The first stop is persecution.com. That's the main Voice of the Martyrs website, persecution.com. And like you say, there is a disconnect, but one of the things that Voice of the Martyrs will help you do is, instead of God bless persecuted Christians, it becomes very personal. God bless Pastor Wang Yi, who is serving a 9-year prison sentence in China right now, simply for leading an unregistered church. Sustain him and his family today. When it becomes a name and a face, maybe it's a face on your refrigerator, maybe it's a face beside your Bible, then it's much more personal. And so I'd encourage people, come to persecution.com. You can sign up for the free monthly magazine from the Voice of the Martyrs. Again, to put names and faces and places to your prayers. We actually have an app called Pray Today that every day it pulls up a new prayer request for persecuted Christians around the world. And you can put that on your phone. You can actually set a reminder, hey, every day at 8 a.m., every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to stop and I'm going to pray for my persecuted family around the world. The app is a great way to do that. I would encourage you. I host our podcast, Voice of the Martyrs Radio. That's another great way. One of the things we almost always end our conversations with is, okay, how do we pray? How do we pray for Christians in Afghanistan? How do we pray for Christians in Iran? How do we pray for Bible smugglers who are trying to get God's word into closed nations? So that's another way to equip yourself. And again, as you learn these things and as you learn names and faces and places, it becomes much more personal. It becomes much more that family relationship where you don't have to be reminded to pray. It becomes a very natural part of your daily prayer life.
We're listening to Todd Nettleton, the Chief of Media Relations and Message Integration for the Voice of the Martyrs USA. Fascinating information. We've been talking about the organization. Sam has been asking about prayer and particularly how can we make that work in our local situation. Let's talk about something else, Todd, that is just very, very basic. The significance of a Bible for someone a believer living in a hostile or restricted nation. What does that mean for them?
Well, let me tell you a story to illustrate what it means. My coworker here at Voice of the Martyrs, Peter Jasek, was sent to prison in Sudan. He was there to help the church, to meet with persecuted Christians. He went to the airport to fly home to the Czech Republic, and instead of getting on the plane, he was arrested, and he would spend about 14 months in prison. The first 4 months of that time, he didn't have a Bible. They couldn't get him one. He couldn't get one in prison. Finally, after about 4 months, his consular officer came to visit him in prison, and he brought a Czech Bible to Peter. And Peter talks about, after 4 months without access to God's word, what it meant to him to hold the Bible in his hands. In fact, it was so precious to him that he read it all day long, every day, until he had read it from cover to cover. It took him about 3 weeks because he could only read certain times of the day, because in order to read, he had to stand next to the only window in his cell. And during most of the day, there was enough light right beside that window that he could read. And so he would stand there all day long and read the Bible for 3 weeks. He talks about how precious that time was, how precious it was to have God's word, to read it, to bathe in it, to just infuse it into his mind all day long, every day, because he'd been 4 months sort of in the desert. And now here was a fountain, and he was ready to drink deeply. That's the spirit of our brothers and sisters living in hostile and restricted nations. God's word is precious. Some of them, if you offered them a bar of gold or a printed Bible, they would take the Bible. They would leave the bar of gold behind because they see the Bible as more significant, more valuable, more important. And so I've met Christians who say, I prayed for years that I would be able to have my own copy of God's word. Wow. I feel incredibly convicted by that because I have like 8 translations on my phone in my pocket, and they prayed for years to have one Bible that they could own, that could be their very own. So that's how significant the Bible is. And that's part of the reason the Voice of the Martyrs is committed to a Bible for every believer living in hostile and restricted nations. 20 years ago, you might have said, well, that's a dream. That'll never happen. We believe in our lifetime that we can make that happen. We can see every believer living in hostile and restricted nations have their own copy of God's word. And sometimes that'll be a printed Bible. Sometimes it'll be a memory card that has the Bible on it, which also happens to be very easy then to transfer to your friends. Sometimes it'll be an audio Bible. If a place has a low literacy rate, maybe that's an audio Bible or a solar-powered audio Bible player. But we believe every believer living in hostile and restricted nations should have their own copy of God's Word in a way that's meaningful and ministers to them.
Well, we're talking to Todd Nettleton, and obviously you can hear his passion. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see his passion for what he does. And it's such an important work. And it's one, Todd, that this should unify the church. Our audience is global, but I would say predominantly North America. And there seems to be a lot of tension, division, disunity in the church. This is something that should unite every church. What you do, persecution.org, your radio show, your magazine, these things should be in every church, regardless of what kind of church you are. And so I'd encourage you, if you're listening to this and it's been a while, or if you've never checked out this information, this is something that can unite your church. When you start praying for the persecuted church, when you start praying for and learning about what's happening in other countries and other places, it's something that I just think the Spirit works through it. And I think God honors a church that is praying for and thinking about and doing something for the persecuted church. So Todd, I just want to say thank you for what you do. And I think it's extraordinarily important that every church be involved in this.
Well, thank you. I consider it an amazing privilege. The writer of Hebrews talks about persecuted Christians, and there's that little phrase, of whom the world was not worthy. Literally, these people are too good for this world, and we get to go and have tea with them and hear their stories and fellowship with them. So that's just an amazing privilege, and I don't think of it really as work. I think of it as just a blessing.
Well, Todd, before we wrap this up, I want to hear from you about maybe something we have not asked you, something that you would like to add, something that you would like to emphasize. We want our audience to know in this brief time as much as possible about Voice of the Martyrs, whether it's a story, whether it is some more information. Please, before we sign off, give us whatever you want to share.
Let me just encourage you. I think there is a perception, maybe if you hear about a Christian in prison or you hear about a Christian who's been beaten for their faith, your picture in your mind is somebody who's really depressed and downtrodden and maybe kind of hiding out. Don't have that picture in your mind. These are brothers and sisters who are living a victorious Christian life. They are excited about what God is doing. Let me give you an example. One of the early persecuted Christians that I had the chance to interview was a lady in China named Sister Tong. And Sister Tong had just been released from serving 6 months in prison a few weeks before I was there. And we had the chance to sit down together, and she hosted a house church meeting at her home. So at that time, the police would raid the house church meetings. They would write down the ID information for everyone who was present. But the person who owned the home, the host of the meeting, would get arrested and go off to jail. And so Sister Tong had just spent 6 months in prison. And I know I'm going to come back to America. I'm going to do interviews like this one. I'm going to write a story for our Voice of the Martyrs magazine. So you're going to tell somebody's story. The first thing you need is the setting, right? So let's get the setting. And I say, Sister Tong, tell me about the prison. And my translator translates the question. And what I'm thinking is, tell me how hard the bed was, tell me how cold it was, tell me how big the rats were, how terrible the food was. Let's paint a picture of how miserable it is in a Chinese prison. So my translator translates the question, and Sister Tong gets what I can only call a heavenly smile on her face. And she says something in Chinese, and my translator says, "Oh, yes, that was a wonderful time." And I looked at the translator because I thought there's no way that he understood it. There's absolutely no way that question got translated correctly. Are you sure? I asked her about the print. Yes, I'm sure. I know you asked her. She understood the question. Yes, and that's what she said. And I said, okay, you're going to have to explain. Nobody thinks of 6 months in a Chinese prison as a wonderful time. You better explain yourself. And she went on to say, during that 6 months that I was in prison, Jesus was so close to me. He was right there with me every single day during that 6 months in a way that he's not I don't experience his love outside of prison. I just had this amazing new personal experience of Christ's love. And she said, you know what else? There were some ladies in my cell, and when I got there, they did not know Jesus. And I got to be the one to introduce them to Jesus, and they're now following Jesus. So God was with me, and God gave me a ministry to do. Of course, that was a wonderful time. Well, why wouldn't it be a wonderful time? And I got to say, that was many years ago now, but it totally blew my mind, and how I think about suffering, how I think about hardship. Is it possible that the suffering in my life, is it possible that, sickness or unemployment or, losing a home, is it possible those things could be wonderful times if we would sort of borrow Sister Tong's glasses and try to see them through her eyes of, well, is God with me in this? Of course he is. Is God giving me a ministry to do? If I have eyes to see it, probably he is. Therefore, even really difficult things we can think about as a wonderful time. Like I say, if we kind of borrow Sister Tong's glasses and try to look through her eyes.
Todd, we have been delighted in the way that I think we need to be delighted. You think about martyrdom and imprisonment and persecution, just like the sister in prison, you don't naturally start thinking of how wonderful it is. But hearing you talk about these believers and hearing our opportunity to come alongside them in prayer, Bible, donations, whatever the case may be, is our privilege as well. So let me thank you on behalf of Voice of the Martyrs, and our podcast, Reign on Leadership at Church Answers, for allowing us to share a bit of your message.
It has been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Todd. As we wrap this up, I want to give you a reminder. Belay Solutions. Belay. Just remember Belay. You can't see Amy, but I'm trying to think of this. Amy, if I recall correctly, in 2 to 3 different organizations, depending on how you define the university, I think we've brought on 5 different people from Belay. I'm trying to think. You can correct me if I'm incorrect. We have now one that has been with us for years that we actually ended up hiring at Church Answers, and we just have a brand new one, Christina, as well. So when we talk about an organization that provides virtual assistants, bookkeepers, web specialists, social media managers, we know them. And we believe in them. And so I just want you to, in this time of post-COVID, especially for churches trying to figure out who do I hire, what do I get, whatever, you need to try Belay. You just really need to try them because they're an organization. Hey, most of the time it's going to work out, but if it doesn't, they'll take care of everything for you and they'll find you the person that will work out. And we're batting about 1,000, I think, Sam.
We are. And you know what I love? There's a lot to like about Belay, but you know what I love most?
That I talk about them?
No, their onboarding. Like Christina's great. Like they do all the tough stuff for you for matching,
Yes.
and they are really good at what they do. Christina jumped right in, and in 24 hours, my life is better because of her. And
Wow.
You may think I'm speaking in hyperbole. I'm really not. I'm really not. She's already cleaned stuff up in my life. My calendar, oh my goodness, it's great. So we certainly want to just continue to thank Belay, and link in the show notes. Right, Amy? We click on that link if you're looking to, and it doesn't have to be full time. It can be part time too. They've got all sorts of ways that these virtual assistants can help you. So
there are a lot of show notes, and I really want to point you to persecution.com, Church Answers University, Belay, the New Believer's Bible. We got a lot of show notes, but you go there. So thank you again for listening to Reign on Leadership. If you're listening to it on a podcast app, give us a rating and review. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe. Tell the world how much you are appreciating Reign on Leadership, because we bring it as a ministry of both Tyndale and Belay, and we're happy to be here with you. We'll continue to help churches get healthier together.